think that the red zone we're talking about is when you're looking at the time that it adjusts to transitioning your assets into some income producing assets. And I think people a lot of times get it the wrong idea about this. People think that their money's just in the market forever, right? And you could just all of a sudden start taking money out and selling stocks, and I think that's the big problem. And I think that the retirement red zone starts, I think, really around 10 years, and it really hits 5 years before retirement. And why it's so important to really transition the assets into income producing assets is because if you miss the wrong boat and the market does make a downturn, your retiring might be delayed. And that's where I think as a financial advisor it's our idea and our duty to make sure that you don't have to make retirement a farther down the road process, and make sure it's an easier process and right when you want to. Sometimes I even think it's a let's just say it's a cool way to make it earlier, right? Because I think that some people don't even understand that we still have the ability as a financial advisor, the right way to make retirement easier at an earlier time period, and I say that because a lot of clients will come in thinking that the normal retiree age is 67 or 65, and I'm able to help them retire even earlier, and then it kind of opens their eyes to things. And that's where it starts. I think why it's so important. The retirement red zone is so important to understand early, because if you do understand it early, it might even change when you can retire. And if you meet the right advisor, wink, wink, I'm sure we can possibly make that work. But you'll never know unless you do the numbers and see how you can immediately shift the growth to income. But Jim, you pull up a great point, and I think that the growth to income part is what plays a big factor. Because I say this a lot, advisors in general don't like to talk about switching from growth to income. And I'm guessing all of you out there know why, right? And it's not rocket science, right? You take more income or you transition more money from the market to income. That affects the advisor's fees. That affects the advisor's investable amount of assets. The company that, if you're with a corporation or a company that is hiring that advisor, it's taking assets from them. So the training mechanisms it takes for advisors to understand the best for the client is just different. And I think that really, Jim, if you want the really big, the big gorilla in the room, it is. It's the fact that the advisors aren't trained properly, and that we're not looking at the client's best interests. We're looking at ourselves, and we're biased. And we might say, oh, it could still help them. I mean, yeah, but are we helping them the most? Is the transition in the retirement red zone, when that time comes up, is it the right process? And we're going to go over a little bit about that today. I know you're going to have some questions for me, and I'm super excited to go over that. But I think that we need to switch our mindsets around, right? From what we used to think about to now, hey, we've got a certain amount of assets, and growth and income have to be separated. Because all of our lives, we looked at income. Mm-hmm. Well, I asked a client earlier today, I said, why would we look at our next 10 years the same that we did our last 20? Mm-hmm. They're totally different, right? When that retirement red zone hits, right, income producing assets are going to be starting to correlate, right? Or cash flow, or, money coming out of investments, okay? Instead of what? Money going into investments. And we don't position and talk about that enough, because every advisor and every company wants to somehow keep the majority of assets in the market. And it's hard to understand, right? Because people are taught that their entire lives. But Jim, you know the most, because you've listened to me episode after episode after episode. I really try to make people understand it as a mathematical side of it, right? Mm-hmm. And when you think about it logically, it kind of, and if you're listening out there and you're thinking to yourself, David, what are you like? Okay, so tell me, what are you talking about, right? How can I do that, right? It's just a simple process of other alternative investments, right? Being a part of your plan, having a holistic approach in the market when it comes to an advisor, not just wanting one thing, putting all your eggs in one basket. And a lot of people are like, well, I've got money in the market, but I'm diversified. listen, everything in a security, okay, has a risk to it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just say, oh, I'm diversified. No, I mean, you've got systematic risk, you've got non-systematic risk, you've got, cyclical risk, you've got environmental risk, you've got business risk, you've got everything that comes into the stock market, bond market, whatever you want to say. There's a certain time when you have to eliminate that risk for income, right? Because clients don't have the ability to take that risk when it comes to their income they need for the next 20 years. So that has to be separated as a thought process for an actual advisor has to think about the client. And that's what I think what makes me so successful at a young age is talking to the client about their goals and needs first and assessing the income first.
Right. Well, David, when people hear about retirement red zone, a lot of times I do believe they get confused or they don't understand the full definition of the retirement red zone. They just think, well, it's 5 to 10 years from retirement. But if we get specific, we're talking about a pivotal window here. Which year, in your opinion, do you shift to accumulation to distribution in the retirement red zone?
Good question. I think this depends on the client, but I think, and I say that, Jim, and it's mine. I know it's a lot of my answers, but certain clients are healthier than others. Certain clients retire earlier than others. Certain clients have different assets than others. Certain clients have more assets than others. Certain clients have more pensions than others. So a lot of these questions are asked to an advisor, and the right answer to every question is it depends on the client. Now, I will say the average retiree for a client that I'd say that really you should be shifting towards looking at distribution side is probably 55. And that's where you really have to understand that when you're 59 and a half, you're going to be able to use those assets without a penalty. So that's 5 years before that 60-year-old mark. But I do think that depends on the client and the age and where they are and what assets they have. If you have non-qualified assets, we're looking more at a non-retirement account portfolio. So that brings up, okay, now we can make, dividends or interest or however that could come about, right? Without creating let's just say a penalty-free withdrawal tactic. Okay. Now, when it comes down to it, I think that 55 is important, but every client, Jim, is going to have their own way to look at it. And I look at every client differently because I've got clients that are worth 5 million plus, and they're less worried about their income than they are, taxable assets. And am I going to give some to my kids and is it going to be taxable when I give it to them? Because the gross are going to outweigh the income by far, and they're not spending the income, right? I've also got clients that are worth 500 grand, and that 500 grand needs to last them for the rest of their entire lives, right? So now it's a whole different equation, right? The percentage of assets changes, right, with what I'm doing because of the income that needs to come in. That same that goes with debt. If you're out there and you have no debt, right, you're in a lot better position than someone with fixed expenses of $3,000 to $4,000 a month. Okay, because that's $3,000 to $4,000 a month that you don't have to spend, right? That you could use on other things, that you could use on other trips, vacations, free money, variable money. So it really, I know a lot of times people want an exact answer, but that's why I think it's so important on this podcast to really in this radio show to really talk to people about why it's important that they look at to themselves and they look at what their problems are. It's not going to be the same as everyone else. And I think that's, I had a client bring four different friends to the next seminar. And I said, you can listen to this guy, he's awesome. And I said, as I was going over it, they all said the same thing. Well, no one talks about that side, right? No one talks about each person needing different things and why it's important to plan individually. Every single advisor group out there wants to talk about, hey, I can make you this, or I can do this for you, or I can plan this because you're in this asset group or this age group. And it just doesn't work like that, Jim. And that's where it's hard to be a good advisor. And that's why I think I love doing it.